Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive. This time, you guys sent us a super interesting mix of stuff, all about Dave Rubin's book, Don't Burn This Book.
Yeah, we've got parts of the book itself, some articles, even some stats to think about.
It's a lot to unpack, especially for anyone, trying to figure out this whole idea of being authentic in your political views and what that even means for freedom these days.
It's a huge topic, definitely.
Absolutely. So our mission, if you want to call it that, is to break down Rubin's main arguments, see where that tension is between what individuals want and what the government's role is, and dive into some seriously hot-button stuff.
Oh yeah, we're talking free speech, gun control, immigration. We even have some stuff on transgender issues, stuff that gets people fired up.
For sure. But look, we're not here to tell you what to think.
Exactly. More like giving you the tools to think for yourself.
I love that. Okay, so to start off, let's jump right into Rubin's own story. He talks about this idea of coming out politically, which is interesting. And you can tell that hiding his real beliefs really messed with him emotionally, like it took a toll.
Yeah, almost like he was in some kind of closet, afraid to just say what he thought because of what people would say or do.
And I think a lot of people can relate to that, especially now when everything feels so divided.
Big time. Like you're constantly worried about being judged or canceled or whatever.
He even tells the story about a close friend who totally turned on him just because he was on Fox News.
Oh.
And the thing is, Rubin was a liberal for years. It shows you how just expressing a different opinion, even if you've always leaned a certain way, can lead to losing friends, being isolated.
What's crazy is how that fear of being rejected socially, can actually warp how we see the world.
Oh, interesting.
Like when people are too scared to speak up, you can't have a real honest debate.
Right.
And that stops us from actually making progress or understanding each other.
It's like everyone's walking on eggshells all the time, afraid to say the wrong thing. Which brings us to what Rubin says about facts and how important it is to fight against this political gaslighting thing.
Oh, yeah, he talks about that.
He was literally called a Nazi just because he didn't agree with some stuff, which is, that's a tactic to shut down the conversation completely, right?
Totally. It's meant to silence people, make them afraid to even speak up.
And with all the misinformation out there, all the propaganda, it's so hard to know what's true anymore.
Harder than ever.
Rubin even admits that he used to believe that whole systemic racism narrative.
Really?
100%. But then he started digging into the actual data, and he was shocked by what he found.
I can imagine.
He's got some stats in the book, and they really make you question that whole narrative, especially when it comes to police and Black Americans.
It's got to be tough to confront stuff that goes against what you thought you knew.
Absolutely. And the interesting thing is, these statistics are from a Black scholar at Harvard.
That's important.
It's like, regardless of your political side, you have to at least consider the information, objectively.
Facts are facts.
They are. It all comes back to critical thinking.
Which seems to be in short supply these days.
No kidding. Okay, so shifting gears a bit. Let's talk about how Rubin defines classical liberalism.
Okay.
He gets down to the core of it, and it's all about individual liberty,
Limited government, people being able to make their own choices, being tolerant of different views.
Well, it's like that saying, live and let live.
Exactly.
But it's not always so easy, right? Rubin doesn't pretend that there aren't tensions between individual rights and, trying to create a more just society.
For sure. He uses some really concrete examples to show this, particularly when it comes to things like gun control.
Oh, yeah, gun control is a huge one. He's a strong supporter of the Second Amendment, seeing it as a way to protect ourselves from the government having too much power.
Makes sense.
But he also gets the concerns about gun violence, especially with all the mass shootings we've had. It's like, how do we balance those two things?
Tough question.
No easy answers there. And another tough one he tackles is immigration.
Right.
He even brings up things that Barack Obama and Chuck Schumer have said in the past about needing border security.
Interesting.
And it's not like Rubin's taking some extreme position, He's more about finding a middle ground, a common sense approach that respects individual liberty and the law.
A balance, basically.
Exactly. He's trying to find that sweet spot where freedom and responsibility can coexist.
I like that.
And he applies that same idea to abortion, which, let's be honest, is a really personal, often really divisive issue.
Definitely sensitive territory.
He actually talks about how his own stance has evolved over time, which I thought was pretty cool.
That shows he's willing to think things through to change his mind.
Yeah, and he's not trying to shove his views down anyone's throat. He gets that it's complex, and what he stresses is the need to talk respectfully and find compromise. even when it comes to deeply held beliefs.
Finding that middle ground without demonizing people who see things differently.
Right, exactly.
Which brings us to another big theme in the book, free speech, even for stuff that pisses us off.
Oh, he has a lot to say about that. He talks about being attacked online by what he calls the mob, just for having guests on his show with controversial views.
Yikes.
It's a reminder of how easily we can lose free speech, and not just through the government censoring stuff, but through social pressure, harassment online.
That whole cancel culture thing.
Yeah, and he even compares it to what's happening in other countries, like the UK and Australia, where they have all these laws against hate speech.
Right, and those laws can be pretty broad, used to silence anyone who goes against the grain.
It's a cautionary tale, you know. It shows what can happen when we start trying to control what people think and say, even if we think we're doing it for the right reasons.
It's a slippery slope, for sure.
Totally. And it makes you appreciate the First Amendment here in the U.S., even with its problems. It's still a pretty big deal when it comes to protecting free expression.
For sure, a cornerstone.
And remember that whole thing with Brett Weinstein, the professor at Evergreen College?
Oh, yeah, I remember that.
He was basically ostracized for speaking out against racial segregation on campus.
Which is ironic, considering the whole point of a college is supposed to be about open discussion and exploring different ideas.
Right. It shows that even in places that claim to be all about diversity and inclusion, sometimes there's no tolerance for views that challenge the status quo.
It's like you can have any opinion you want as long as it's the right opinion.
Exactly. But as Rubin points out, it's those clashes of ideas, those moments of disagreement, that actually help us learn and grow.
It's how we get better, how we evolve.
He's all about standing up for what you believe in, even when everyone's coming at you.
Takes guts.
It does. Which leads to what he says about personal responsibility and gratitude. He has some really interesting stuff from his time touring with Jordan Peterson, who's big on self-improvement and how individual actions can have a ripple effect.
That whole idea of fix yourself before you try to fix the world.
Exactly. And it's so powerful because when we focus on being the best versions of ourselves, we naturally start making things better around us.
It's empowering because it means we actually have some control over things.
Instead of feeling helpless and focusing on all the negativity.
For sure. And Rubin even talks about political burnout and how we need to take breaks from the news and social media, like, constantly.
That 24-hour news cycle is brutal. It's like a fire hose of negativity.
It is. He's all about reclaiming our time and energy and using it for things that matter. Relationships, passions, personal growth.
The good stuff.
Exactly. And he has some really practical advice, like setting limits on social media, connecting with old friends, and making your own home a place for traditions and good times.
Creating those positive spaces in your life.
Exactly. It's about balance, you know, making room for joy and laughter, even when the world feels crazy.
Speaking of joy, I thought it was really cool how he talked about deciding to have a family through surrogacy.
Oh, yeah.
He says it changed his whole perspective, reminded him that there's beauty and wonder out there beyond all the politics.
Powerful stuff.
It is. It reminds us that life's about more than ideology and activism. It's about love, connection, new life.
The essentials.
Okay, before we move on, I want to get your take on something Rubin said that stuck with me.
Sure. What is it?
He talks about how he used to think America was deeply flawed, even, like, hateful at times.
I could see that.
But then he changed his view, started focusing on the good stuff, our freedoms, the opportunities we have, the progress we've made. He even says that if America was as bad as some people say, he wouldn't have been allowed to have a child through surrogacy.
Interesting point.
It's like he's challenging us to see past the negativity and recognize the good, even if it's not perfect.
That's huge, especially now when negativity seems to be everywhere.
Totally. It's about choosing to see the glass as half full, which can be really powerful.
It can. It makes you think, how can we appreciate the good stuff more, the things we often take for granted?
Great question, and one we should explore more. But I think it starts with understanding that progress isn't always a straight line. There will always be setbacks, challenges, injustices to fight against.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean we haven't made progress or that the freedoms we have aren't valuable.
It's about perspective, I guess.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that we're all on a journey, both individually and as a society. There will be ups and downs, but the important thing is to keep moving forward with hope and a willingness to learn and grow.
Well said. Ready to dive into the next layer of this deep dive.
Absolutely. Let's hear what Rubin has to say about foreign policy and how important it is for a country to be strong.
This should be good. He's got some pretty thought-provoking ideas, especially about taking a realist approach to international relations strength, strategic clarity, all that.
Can't wait. He gets into some real-world examples, too, like that whole red line thing with Syria and Obama.
Oh, yeah, that was a mess.
Right. When that line got crossed and there were no real consequences, it made America look weak, not just to Syria, but to everyone who might want to challenge us.
It's like a case study in how not to handle things on the world stage. You can't just talk tough. You got to back it up with action.
Exactly. And that's where Rubin's idea of peace through strength comes in.
Okay, I'm listening.
He wants the U.S. to be so strong militarily that nobody would even think about messing with us. Like, the best way to prevent a fight is to be the biggest, baddest dude in the room.
Makes sense on a basic level.
Right. But Rubin goes deeper. He says true strength isn't just about weapons and soldiers. It's also about knowing what we believe in as a country, what our values are, and being willing to defend those.
So it's about identity, purpose.
Yeah.
Knowing what America stands for.
Exactly. And he connects this back to gratitude, which is interesting.
Gratitude.
Yeah, like being grateful for the people who came before us, the ones who built this country and fought for our freedoms. He thinks that actually makes us stronger.
Makes you appreciate what we have.
Right. It's like we're not just inheriting this country. We're responsible for taking care of it, for making sure it lasts.
We're stewards, not just beneficiaries.
I like that. Stewards. And that means being vigilant, especially with all this fake news stuff that's going around, which Rubin says is all over the mainstream media.
Yeah, it's tough. Sometimes it feels like you can't trust anything you read or see.
It's like we're living in this world where it's almost impossible to tell what's true and what's not, where reporting the news and pushing an agenda are all mixed up.
It makes you wonder, who can you believe?
Exactly. And Rubin blames a lot of it on that 24-hour news cycle we were talking about and on social media, where it feels like the crazier, the more outrageous something is, the more attention it gets.
Outrage sells.
For sure.
Yeah.
And it's not always that people are intentionally lying. Sometimes it's just that certain stories get more attention while others get buried.
Bias, conscious or unconscious, definitely plays a role.
And that can really mess with how we understand the world, even affect what our government does.
If people are getting a distorted view of reality, you can't have real conversations or make good decisions.
Nope. So what's the solution? Rubin says we got to become like media detectives.
Interesting analogy.
Right. Be aware of our own biases, look for different perspectives, and learn to spot the warning signs that someone's trying to manipulate us.
Develop those critical thinking skills, basically.
Exactly. We can't just absorb information passively anymore. We have to question it, evaluate it, see if it holds up.
Like we all need to become professional fact checkers.
Pretty much. And those skills are super helpful when it comes to those tough political conversations, the kind you might have with family or friends who see things totally differently.
Oh, tell me about it. Holiday dinners can be a minefield.
Right. But Rubin has some tips for handling those potentially explosive situations.
Like what?
Stay calm, stick to the facts, and remember that sometimes it's better to just agree to disagree.
Pick your battles, basically.
Exactly. Sometimes the relationship is more important than winning the argument.
For sure. And that whole idea, finding common ground, focusing on what unites us rather than what divides us, that's at the heart of Rubin's last chapter, where he talks about moving on from political burnout and getting our time and energy back for the things that truly matter.
It's like we can't be in fight mode all the time, right? We got to take breaks, recharge, and put ourselves first sometimes.
Self-care is important.
It is, both for us and for the people we care about.
Makes sense. So how do we do that? How do we step back from the political chaos and find those things that bring us joy and meaning?
Well, Rubin has some ideas about that, and they're surprisingly simple yet super powerful.
I'm all ears.
He talks about how addicted we are to our phones, like it's this constant need to be plugged into the outrage,
True.
He even suggests leaving our phones in a different room at night, so we're not starting A&D ending the day staring at that little black mirror.
Makes you think.
Right. It's not just about less screen time, it's about taking back control of our attention, deciding how we want to spend our time and energy.
Intention.
Exactly. And get this, he actually recommends taking a break from all else social media twice a year for a whole week each time.
Wow, like a digital detox.
Yeah. The last week of summer and the last week of the year, like hitting the reset button on your brain.
I love that idea. You get so sucked into the drama and negativity online, it's easy to forget there's a whole world out there.
Totally. And speaking of reconnecting with the real world, Rubin's also big on tradition, gathering with loved ones, creating those shared experiences that remind us what's truly important.
He talks about hosting holidays at your home, making it a priority.
Yeah, making it a tradition, like creating these anchors of stability and connection when everything else feels so chaotic.
It's like coming home, in a way.
I love that. Coming home.
Well,
He even suggests getting back in touch with old friends, especially those pre-internet pals.
how interesting.
He says it brings back a sense of innocence, reminds you of who you were before all the online noise took over.
There's something special about those longtime friendships, the ones that started offline, you know?
Totally. Like going back to your roots when things were simpler, more genuine.
And less about getting likes and followers.
Exactly. It reminds us that real connection is still possible, that we don't have to be defined by our online persona or our political views.
There's so much more than that.
And speaking of remembering what's important, Rubin's last piece of advice is to cultivate a sense of humor.
Oh, I like that.
He says laughter is like an antidote to all the political burnout, a way to acknowledge how absurd it all is without letting it drag you down.
Reminds me of Jordan Peterson, actually. He's known for being this serious intellectual, but he uses humor a lot in his talks.
Really?
Oh, yeah. It helps him connect with people, make complex ideas easier to understand. Like, it's okay to not be serious all the time.
It's about finding that balance, right?
Mm.
Engaging with the important stuff, but not taking ourselves too seriously.
Exactly. Life's meant to be enjoyed, not just endured.
Couldn't have said it better myself. So as we wrap up this deep dive into Dave Rubin's Don't Burn This Book,
It's been quite a journey.
it has. I'm walking away with this feeling of hope, this belief that even when things feel divided and overwhelming, we can still choose how we respond, how we engage, how we live our lives.
We have more control than we think.
Absolutely. We can get caught up in the outrage, or we can focus on what brings us joy, meaning, connection. We can let fear and negativity rule us, or we can choose courage, compassion, and, yeah, a sense of humor. The choice is ours.
That's the way.
To all of you listening, we encourage you to keep exploring these ideas, to have those thoughtful conversations, and to never stop questioning, learning, and growing. Keep thinking for yourself, keep speaking your truth, and remember that what you do as an individual can actually make a difference in creating a more free, just, and compassionate world.
What a great message to end on.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, keep exploring, keep connecting, and keep the conversation going.